I'm going to show you this Precision 6766 that I converted to a 6767. This is on a BMW with the N54 motor, so it's a single turbo setup. We did a t51r mod to it, and there was no other machining done on the compressor housing because it was already machined for this compressor wheel that we used. The wheel is a little bit different than Precision's, but it's taller, so it's an extended tip. And the other thing about it that's different is it has a 2mm super back so that it will fit inside of a Garrett ball bearing center cartridge. The downside, or I guess the thing to be aware of, is this drain is different because this works on the Precision turbo. Well, basically it works on t51r bearing housings and Precision's ball bearing version of this turbo. This originally was a journal bearing turbo. I'll give you an idea of what I had to do to this to convert it over. Instead of having a normal bearing housing that would connect to a plate or bolt to a plate that would mount to this housing, I have a Garrett ball bearing center cartridge and a t51r adapter plate. The exhaust housing is the original exhaust housing, which is Precision's .82 AR turbine housing, and I just machined that out for our 67mm turbine wheel. There's also machining required to machine the housing to fit the bearing housing. So this bearing housing has to go in deeper, and another thing I had to do was I had to make spacers underneath these brackets so that I wouldn't have to machine too much out of this housing to make it really thin depth wise. So I was able to put those spacers in here so I didn't go as deep or deeper than I had to, so that I could basically keep more of the exhaust housing rather than machine it so deep it would thin it out. These housings already seem pretty thin. There's not really a lot of meat in them. I trimmed it up a little bit here. That will help it last longer to get those casting marks out of it. This is going to use different hardware than the normal Precision turbo. So the oil feed fitting is going to be a t51r. So is the coolant lines if he chooses to use those, and the drain. Another thing to mention is these bolts are normally they are 5/16 thread the way Precision sends them, and these are usually 8mm by 1.25, but on their T4 housings they're commonly the same as these bolts, which is 5/16 by 18. People often mix these bolts up with these and then they strip the threads out on them, or they just over tighten these bolts and cause the threads to strip out that way. Overall, it's a pretty neat turbo. This is a very similar build to the turbo that Ian has put on his 335i, except this compressor wheel is bigger. This compressor wheel is 67.43mm, which is the same as what Precision offers, but the compressor wheel that Ian is using is a 66.3mm. So this one's a little bit bigger, but this is a really nice setup for a single turbo BMW 335i or 135i with an N54 motor. The steel ball bearing, 67mm on both sides, so it should make great power.